Welcome, everyone. Before we jump into today's deep dive, if you find our analysis useful, please do take a second to like this and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out.
Absolutely.
Okay, so today we're looking at quite a significant development in the U.S. national security world.
Yeah, the Mike Waltz situation. Moving from national security advisor to the UN ambassador nomination.
Exactly. And this all happened, just over 100 days after he started as NSA?
Right around 100 days, yeah. And it coincided, didn't it, with those reports about the messaging app incident?
The Signal issue, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll definitely need to unpack that. Plus, you got Secretary of State Marco Rubio stepping in as interim NSA.
So, a lot happening very quickly.
Definitely. President Trump made the announcement Thursday, May 1st on Truth Social.
Which is, pretty standard communication method there.
It is. And it's a big shakeup for the national security team, especially, like you said, so early in Waltz's tenure.
Reports suggest the actual decision for the UN nomination was kind of last minute, like that Thursday morning.
Although apparently there had been some discussions, beforehand about maybe moving him out of the NSA.
That seems to be the case. Waltz himself said he was deeply honored to keep serving.
And Vice President Vance, he framed it quite positively, didn't he? Called it a promotion.
Yeah, emphasizing Trump's trust in Waltz and mentioning Waltz's work on NSC reforms.
But let's be real. The timing alongside this SignalGate thing, as people are calling it, is hard to ignore.
It really is. That seems pretty central to the whole story, or at least the perception of it.
So remind us, what exactly was the SignalGate issue?
Okay, so back in late March, Waltz set up this Signal group chat. The title was apparently Houthi PC Small Group.
Right, for discussing potential strikes in Yemen against the Houthis.
Exactly. The problem was he inadvertently, it seems, added Jeffrey Goldberg to the chat.
The editor-in-chief of The Atlantic.
The very same one. So obviously not someone who should be in a secure government chat about military operations.
No kidding. That's a major, major slip-up. And sensitive information was shared.
Apparently so. Reports say Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared details about the potential timing of U.S. military operations.
Wow.
Now, Hegseth maintains nothing he shared was actually classified information.
But the Pentagon's acting inspector general has still launched an investigation into his use of Signal for this kind of coordination, right?
That's correct. They're looking into it.
Meanwhile, you had VP Vance basically dismissing the whole thing, calling it a nothing burger.
He did. He insisted it had zero bearing on Waltz leaving the NSA role, saying it was just about putting talent where it fits the mission best.
But then there was that photo, wasn't there? The Reuters photo.
Yes. The day before the announcement, I think. It showed Waltz in a cabinet meeting using his phone.
And the screen showed what looked like a modified version of Signal telemessage, people identified it as.
Right. And you could apparently see recent chats with Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio.
Which just added more fuel to the fire, about how he was handling sensitive communications.
Especially since President Trump himself had apparently expressed doubts about using Signal for government business before.
So for you listening, this really highlights that constant tension, right?
Yeah.
The need for speed in communication versus the absolute necessity for security.
Definitely. When those things get out of sync, you see potential problems like this.
And the topic of that chat, the Yemen strikes, that was part of Operation Rough Rider.
Correct. Operation Rough Rider. It had been going on for, about 40 days at that point?
Targeting hundreds of Houthi sites, over 800, according to reports.
Yeah. But the Signal messages, the ones that became public, also showed some internal disagreements, didn't they?
That's right. Vance apparently raised some concerns in the chat.
What were they specifically?
Concerns that the Yemen strikes maybe weren't quite lining up with Trump's wider foreign policy message, especially regarding European allies, and also potential impact on oil prices, worries about spikes.
Interesting. So less about the military action itself and more about the strategic messaging and economic impact.
Exactly. And Vance apparently defended raising those points, saying it's just part of open debate within the team.
Which, is fair enough. Internal debate is healthy, but having it potentially leak out via Signal is less ideal.
Definitely less ideal. So maybe let's step back a bit. Tell us about Waltz's background. He wasn't new to government.
No, not at all. He's a former Florida congressman, a Green Beret, which is significant military experience.
And he worked in government before Congress too, right?
Yeah, under President George W. Bush. He was in the Pentagon and the White House, then got elected to Congress in 2018.
Served on important committees like Intelligence and Foreign Affairs. Known for being pretty hawkish on China.
Very much so. But his stint as NSA, 101 days, as we said, the second shortest ever.
Which, despite Vance framing it as a promotion, does make you wonder.
It does. Sources rumors, behind the scenes suggest maybe his handling of NSC staff wasn't perfect, and the signal leak definitely didn't help.
So the thinking is maybe Trump's confidence dipped, but he wanted a softer landing for Waltz rather than an abrupt firing.
That seems to be the speculation, yeah. A way to move him without making it look quite so sudden or punitive. His China stance seems less relevant to the immediate reasons for the move here.
Okay, so that brings us to Marco Rubio stepping in as interim NSA while still being Secretary of State.
Yes, holding both hats, which isn't unprecedented. Henry Kissinger famously did it under Nixon and Ford.
Right, Kissinger. But it's a massive portfolio, State Department and running the NSC process.
Absolutely huge. And it's unclear how long Rubio will do both, especially with, everything going on in the world.
Plus, isn't he technically acting in other roles too?
I believe so, yeah. He's juggling quite a bit. It could streamline things having one person in both roles, potentially, but the workload and potential conflicts are significant.
Okay, so looking ahead, Waltz's nomination to the UN, that needs Senate confirmation.
It does, and you can bet the Signal incident and the Yemen operation will come up.
Democrats especially are likely to grill him on that. Senator Chris Coons said he expects a thorough confirmation hearing.
And Senator Mark Warner, who chairs the Intelligence Committee, acknowledged Waltz made a mistake with sensitive info. He predicted, I think the quote was, a pretty brutal hearing.
Oof, brutal.
But then you have someone like Senator John Cornyn, a Republican, expressing confidence he'll be confirmed.
So a range of views. It won't necessarily be a smooth ride through confirmation.
Probably not entirely smooth, no. It depends on how the questioning goes and how Waltz handles it.
And what about the permanent NSA role? Who might be in the running to replace Waltz long term?
Well, reports are floating several names already. People considered close to Trump or influential in his circle.
Like who?
Names like Steve Witkoff, who's been a special envoy for the Middle East, Richard Grenell, former acting DNI and ambassador, Sebastian Gorka, Michael Anton.
Some familiar names from Trump world there. What about Stephen Miller or Rick Grenell again?
They're often mentioned too, yeah. Miller as his deputy chief of staff, Grenell as a special envoy. It's a bit of a guessing game at this point.
But the fact that they're already talking about permanent replacements while Rubio is interim.
It does raise some questions, doesn't it, about, the clarity of the national security hierarchy right now. Is it clear who's really driving the bus day to day on policy coordination?
Yeah, that interagency process needs clear leadership to function well, you'd think.
Usually, yes. Stability and clear lines of responsibility are pretty crucial.
Okay, so just to sort of wrap up the main points here, we've got a very swift change at the top of the NSC. Waltz moves from NSA to a UN nomination after just over 100 days.
Seemingly driven by a mix of things, this SignalGate security lapse, maybe some internal policy disagreements, possibly management style issues.
Rubio steps in as interim NSA, holding two major jobs. Waltz faces Senate confirmation for the UN post, likely with some tough questions.
And there's already speculation about who gets the permanent NSA job, raising questions about, policy consistency and process effectiveness in the meantime.
It really seems to underscore how much personal relationships and maybe perceived trust factor into decisions within this administration's foreign policy structure.
That seems like a fair assessment. The influence of those advisors closest to the president is clearly a major dynamic. Keeping a coherent strategy going through all this will be, a challenge.
It definitely will. Okay, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Lots to unpack there.
Indeed.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. With these kinds of rapid changes, the SignalGate incident, the interim appointments, what kind of impact could all this turbulence have on how the rest of the world sees U.S. foreign policy? Does it affect stability and predictability? Something to think about. Thanks for listening. And again, please do like and subscribe if you haven't already.